Yeah, thank you for joining us for the second half of our 18th annual, and I always pause when I think 18th, that's a long time, 18th annual Native American Studies Week and Native American Heritage Month celebration. I'm Dr. Stephen Criswell, Director of Native American Studies here at USC Lancaster. And I'm delighted to be joined today by three representatives from the Catawba Nation and the Catawba Cultural Center to discuss Catawba Nation contributions to sports and athletics. So joining us today are Ensley Guffey, here, Archivist of the Catawba Cultural Center, and Crystal Frank, who is Wenonah's daughter and the public health nutritionist for Catawba Nation Services, and Dr. Wenonah Haire, the Director of the Catawba Cultural Center. Thank y'all for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
And we'll welcome folks here and joining us by Zoom and by Facebook. We appreciate it. And at the end of this discussion, if you have questions, just type those into the chat and we'll get to those at the end of the program. So we have chosen this year to focus on sports and athleticism as the topic for our Native American Studies Week. So we have a topic every year. And in putting together this program, we knew that we needed to talk about the legacy of Buck George. So Wenonah, let's talk a little bit about your father, Crystal's grandfather, Buck George, because his image is up here in the center as part of the companion exhibit to our events this month. And you can see his image and learn a little bit more about him if you come to the exhibit. But since we have his family here, let's talk a little bit about your father. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, besides all of the stats, he was my hero. He's, in my opinion, one of the true elders that encouraged me to get involved, along with Fred Sanders, in culture. But I'll just give a few little tidbits on some of the things he did in his career. The thing that I think is the most important is he was the first person of color to attend Clemson University. And if you consider that 20 years later, Marion Reeves became the first African American to play there in 1971. So he really got the foot in the door, so to speak, for multiculturalism within Clemson. He had some records at Clemson and at Rock Hill High, but one of the ones at Clemson, he tied for the longest run scrimmage, which was 90 yards on November the 17th in 1951 against Furman. Held that record all the way up until recent years, where one of Clemson's players broke that record. And his comment when he was interviewed is he thought that was amazing that the young man always put his heart into sports, and he was for anybody who put their heart into sports. So I thought that was a very good comment from Dad. He had the most yards rushing in a single game, 204 yards on September the 20th, 1952 against Presbyterian. And he did it in only 15 carries, which is really awesome. His total was still third best for over 30 years, and those two players had 27 and 33 carries. He won the Blue Key Award in 1952 as the Trackman of the Year, where he ran the 220-yard hurdles, 100-yard dash, threw the javelin, and ran relays as well. He was named co-captain of the Clemson football team in 1954, and Crystal and I both got the honor of seeing a plaque on the famous Tiger Ball that they have newly constructed, and that was very moving for me to see Dad and see the original jersey that they played in. He later was drafted by the Washington Redskins in 1955, but he couldn't continue because he got injured and in training camp, and if he had continued on, he might not walk again, so he decided against going on. In 1999, he was inducted to the York County, South Carolina Sports Hall of Fame, and at Rock Hill High, he lettered in 4 different sports. Football was always his love, and one of his loves was to always encourage the youth that he spent time with. He was a coach for Evanport and worked through the Rock Hill Parks and Recreation System. And tribal youth like Connie Wade Sr., he always was there for him and encouraged him. And Connie was an amazing player in his own right. And he was also named All Southern Conference and All State. won the Blue Key Award as the top track and field athlete at Clemson. And he was a 29-year member of the Parks and Recreation Commission. And like I said before, he did coach Gray White football because he loved youth. And he also loved his people. So anytime he got a chance to encourage tribal youth, he did so. He was represented most of his football career. And at the time of his passing in 2013, his 5.33 yards per rush was still 8th in Clemson history. He broke, as I said before, he did break the color line, which is kind of hard for him because he got the name as the Vanishing American, and he took a lot of jabs while he was there, being the only person of color. The Rock Hill Rocket was one of his names, and in one of the audio tapes we have, he's actually even called the Flatfoot Indian, which was interesting to me. But before his passing, he received the key to the city of Rock Hill for his works in parks and recreation, especially for the youth.
Yeah. What position did he play?
He played wingback and running back.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And I didn't realize he was also a track and field athlete as well.
Yeah.
And pretty excelled at that pretty well. You mentioned being the what year was it that he entered Clemson?
Gosh, around 1952. Shortly after that.
But he went to Rock
Hill High. He still holds one record at Rock Hill High.
No.
So,
Was this a time when the Catawbas were welcome at Rock Hill High, or was that still case by case?
yeah, well, Dad never let any of that bother him.
Yeah.
You know, he just accumulated friends, and he loved sports so much. His passion for sports just kind of overcame any negative remarks that would have been thrown his way. He was always involved heavily in sports, and anybody who knew him knew that he had a love for Clemson. You know.
Yeah.
So.
Well, did he ever express any hesitancy or resistance to being drafted to the Washington team, known for its controversial mascot?
Yeah, but the controversy didn't start until recently.
Yeah.
That the way he looked at it from way back when was, you don't ask the wimp to be your mascot. You ask someone fierce. And well, he was very proud of being invited by the Washington Redskins to be a player. And, you know, Dad was kind of mild in nature, so he didn't really participate in the thought process of people wanting name changes. So.
Yeah. And then he served the nation in other areas as well.
He was the assistant chief of the Catawba Nation for 19 years and an interim chief. And it was during the difficult time of the Settlement Act.
Indeed. So that would be the 70s or 80s?
You're asking me, Tom.
No. What's that the obvious?
I do.
19 years, you said?
Yeah.
So you have late 70s to the 80s, and the settlement was 93.
Right. So during that whole process. All right. And so I was going to ask you, and I think you answered this, that in his later years, he continued to be involved in sports and parks and recreation and coaching.
Absolutely.
And so you had mentioned, I think one of his players that had a successful career as well, or
Connie Wade Sr. Yes. And there was Dad was always out there recruiting kids to get involved in sports, because the way he looked at sports is that if you're involved with sports, that's a good way to grow, get physically fit, and also a good way to express yourself without doing it through anger. And so he firmly believed that sports is a way of growing you as a person.
no? Well, in talking about health, and it's a nice segue to talk with Crystal. So this is your grandfather we're discussing, but you yourself seem to have inherited some of his athletic abilities. So can you talk a little bit about your sports career, particularly in college, and the honor that you had a few years ago?
Yeah, so I participated in multiple sports growing up, softball, basketball. Then in the 8th grade, I joined cross country as part of private school that I was attending, and I really did it just because my older sister, was doing cross country, and I thought I'd take a dabble in it, and I really enjoyed it, and I found out that I was pretty good at it, and I felt like, you know, if I put my mind to it, you know, I could get better and better, and I was seeing that, so I really focused on cross country throughout my high school career, and focused on it year round. We unfortunately didn't have a track team at our high school, so it was just cross country in the fall. But I kept up practices and road races and things like that through the winter and the spring and summer. And then I was recruited to run at the collegiate level. I had recruits from, you know, all the way far west is like UNLV to, you know, down south was like Florida State, and then up north with Cornell. But I decided my senior year that I really just wanted to focus on academics and college, just the experience of college. And so I ended up deciding not to run on scholarship at the collegiate level. So sometimes I regret that, because I don't know what that would have been like, you know, what my potential, you know, eventually could have been reached, but it worked out well. I mean, I enjoyed my time at Clemson. That's where I ended up going. Surprise. And still did road races throughout my time at Clemson, and even when I went on to grad school at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. And then I now coach or help coach Spirit Sprinters, which is a tribal youth running program that we have on the Catawba Nation. It's for youth aged 8 to 16. And we incorporate cultural elements into our practices, and we have at least one race that ends each season. And in the spring, we do a Catawba Nation river run race that we will end the season with. So.
What are some of the cultural elements?
Yeah, so for example, well, we do talk to them about our native athletes, especially our you know, Catawba ones. So we do bring that into just the practices, just teaching about the history and letting them know about some of their you know, ancestors before them that have really paved the way for success in you know, in sports. But then we also have like stretches that we'll do. We teach them Catawba, you know, words for some of the stretches. Like if we have them do a stretch that's like the deer stretch or something like that, we'll have them learn the word and then also do the stretch. So.
Oh, great. And I mentioned there was a international honor that you also had. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So I in 2004, I was able to carry the Olympic torch for a leg, and that was in Atlanta, Georgia, and that was a very, very cool experience. Still have the torch because they let you keep it, but it was a huge honor. I was telling my dad this morning on the way to work that I remember being in the bus with all the other runners who were going to be doing a leg of the relay with the torch, and just hearing their stories, I kind of downgraded mine because people are so amazing. And then when they ask you why you're there, but also it was an honor to be able to represent Catawba Nation, to be able to run that leg was pretty cool.
How does that happen? Do you get a phone call from the Olympic Committee or?
No, actually, I believe that this one actually happened because we wrote an essay.
Oh.
Just talked about, you know, different things that I had done and the ways I had worked with the community, or my academics, and then what I had done as far as sports with cross country and whatnot. And
They want to make sure you're able to.
yeah, they wanted to make sure I could make it through my legs.
Well, so I'm sorry, this is fascinating. They drop you off. You're on a bus. They drop you off.
They had a location. I distinctly remember being dropped off at like a Publix, and they have a location. And then my dad has this memory. I did not remember this, but there was he said there was like 9 motorcyclists that kind of, police motorcyclists that accompany you as you're running. And I didn't remember that part. I guess we all focus on our own bits of the day, but yeah, he said that the security was really tight because they had the bombing, you know, several years prior, and then 9/11 happened 3 years before this. So there was a lot of security checks and things like that. But yeah, it's pretty cool.
And you have they give you your own individual torch.
Yeah, there was a button at the bottom, more or less, that you push and it lit up.
Oh, but do you catch the flame from?
Yeah, I mean,
and then it goes
kind
out.
of, yeah, you pass them off, but that they have their own, so they can light it up. So yeah, each person has to.
Oh, I thought they had to use the flame that came from the priest.
You touch, yeah.
Yeah, that's your,
Yeah.
They have a safety.
Yeah.
Place there. Sorry, I get fascinated because it seems unlikely I'll ever do that. Okay, sorry. Well, that's amazing. So where was your leg? You know,
I don't
just
remember.
dropped you off in the middle of nowhere.
I don't-
Outlets to Anchorage.
I just went, it was really all of her. I mean,
Yeah.
because to take it all in was.
How old?
Good God, I think I was. Oh gosh,
Don't look at me.
15, maybe,
Oh,
ish.
yeah.
Yeah, 14, 15, something like that.
Teenager.
Yeah.
Yeah, the entire world is watching to make sure you don't miss it. I would not have been a film.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's screw this up. That's okay. I just found that fascinating.
Yeah.
So, well, let's bring Ensley in. I guess just tell us a little bit about some other Catawba sports figures.
Well, I mean, if you go back in history, you know, Catawba have always played sports and some very traditional sports. We have the stickball game, which had about 4 players on each team. They passed the ball using what has been described as a carved wooden spoon between, 18, 20 inches long. So not quite the lacrosse that we're kind of familiar with. And the ball couldn't touch your hand or the ground. It all had to be by this. That was big game for the Catawba. And then there was the rolling stone game, which comes down. I love the name, but it was, you took flat discs, about 10 to 12 inches in diameter, and you cleared and flattened this like 100-foot path. And so one team would be rolling the discs, and the other team, and we don't know if they were like with discs oncoming or if they're standing to the side, but they took clay balls about the size of a baseball. And the object was to roll the clay balls to knock over the disc before it reached the end.
Okay.
And then they also, far in the past, we know some people who had memories in the 30s of the first 2 games, but there was also a form of soccer, football, of kicking the ball. So the Catawbas have always played sports, from time immemorial. And, I don't know whether they, there was sort of intertribal leagues or anything, but it would not surprise me, particularly since college we're town-based, the Catawba was town-based, and I play with each other. So, I mean, there's a long, deep tradition there, even before, we get into modern sports things. But one of my favorite stories of Catawba athletes is Maroney Mac George, who wrestled back like in the 50s and the early 60s. And this was back in the day, well before the WWE and all this kind of stuff, when you had all these little local and regional wrestling leagues that would come around and play, your high school auditoriums or whatever they set up and do all that. And he was Chief Yellowbird from Gallup, New Mexico, was his tagline. He'd never been to New Mexico his entire life. But that was, and he played the Native American wrestler. Apparently loved it, to the point where when his doctor told him that he couldn't wrestle anymore, it would kill him, he would sneak out of the house. He'd apparently get his youngest child to get his boots and gear and sneak that out, and he would sneak out of the house, much to his wife's dismay. But so he kind of just really dug going around all these different little local matches, wrestling, as this Chief Yellowbird. And he was challenged by someone at some point about going, well, this is a little bit, why are you going out there, doing this? And he said, well, yeah, but there's an Indian out there wrestling. So, these days we talk a lot about representation and stuff. So even in that, that era, he knew that he was out there at least getting, Native Americans in the public eye.
Did he have the plains head business and the
The
whole?
pictures I've seen are very, very basic. The boots,
Yeah.
the trunks, and that's it.
Oh.
Don't seem to have any kind of, but who knows?
Yeah, I mean, it seems so much like a precursor to, I grew up with Chief Walter McDaniel.
Yeah.
Who I would, as an adult found out that I believe he's Seminole.
Yeah.
And I felt some relief. It's like, okay, and so I can imagine that response. Of
Yeah.
At least someone's out there that they're doing something. Although I think Moroni is a much better name for.
Right. So, and apparently the Mac comes from someone could never really pronounce Moroni and kept calling him macaroni. So they finally just call him Mac. So I love that story. He actually, he worked in the mills for a while and did odd jobs, but he wound up being the first Catawba to become a police officer for the York County PD and served there for 30 years. And apparently was notoriously so honest that not only did he give the mayor of York a speeding ticket, but he once gave his own wife a speeding ticket and told her she should have known better. Now, whether or not he slept on the couch that night, it's a whole different thing. So I love the story of Mr.
Yeah, his
Gordon.
stats, how big he was.
He was like 6 foot 230.
Okay.
Yeah. Not quite in Wahoo's league, but
Yeah.
But and another story, very local, behind the Church of Latter-day Saints, there was this red clay ball field. I mean, it's very kind of basic baseball field where the Catawba would play pretty much every Saturday. There was some kind of games, some pickup stuff, but there was also some level of organization. At one point, there was a very local league, and the stories around the field and the games are that it was kind of a rough field to come play, but not because of the players, but because of the audience. Sometimes some of the Catawba in the stands would get a little rowdy. So they had regular games. This was adult playing. This wasn't like a little league thing or anything. But the Catawba apparently became very well known for their pitching. Actually, Bill Harris is your current artist in residence. Both his father and grandfather pitched at the field. The Catawba had a really strong team, to where at one point, they were undefeated in their little league, and the best team in the state also undefeated, and they came down to play the Catawba. The teams and individuals would come down to play the Catawba because the Catawba pitchers particularly, but their teams were just so good that it became a place where other teams throughout the state would come and play to test themselves against Catawba, which I love because way back in the day, Iroquois warriors would take the long trek down the Catawba lands and to fight a Catawba warrior, because if you could defeat a Catawba warrior, you really made your bones.
Yeah.
And this is that tradition carried on where all these white baseball teams come down to face off against the Catawba in their little dirt field, because if you could beat the Catawba, you'd really actually done something. So, and that went on until like the late 70s, I think the field was in, and it kind of converted to a softball.
When did it start? Yeah, since
As close as I can tell, like since Donald Harris was playing on it, had to be in the 40s, early 40s, some maybe as far back as the 30s. But been there for a good long while. And this was a big kind of social and cultural hub for all these years for the Catawba. And I just think it's neat that that people would come down because the Catawba were just so good, even though the Catawba weren't playing in any of the white leagues.
do you know if there were any scouts check them out?
I have no idea. For most of that, I don't know.
Not even aware of it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the Catawba would be allowed to play in the farm leagues or.
Well, I mean, Jim Thorpe got in trouble.
Right.
For playing in a minor league or a local league or something of that sort. So they and he wasn't, from what I understand, the Pop Warner was sending, he fully knew, Thorpe was playing professional ball, but it was like $5 a year or something ridiculous. But he was sending players from Carlisle to these minor league teams. So it's just in the back of my mind, I'm wondering if any of those players came up against the
I don't know. It's something that I want to do some more research in, is interviewing with some of the elders. But I mean, it's a fascinating story to me, and that, that from what I understand, this was very amateur.
Yeah.
But they were just so good.
Yeah. Did they allow non-Catawba players to play on their team?
I don't know. Lots to learn there.
Yeah.
But there's this incredible tradition of sports and athleticism among the Catawba from well before even Don Pardo came around.
Okay. Well, you mentioned a little bit about more traditional pre-contact, perhaps even sports. Is it the stickball? See, I didn't realize that had a stickball playing tradition. It's the same basically as the Cherokee on the city.
Very, very similar. We have the big source on that is Frank Speck,
Right.
From the interviews he did with Catawbas in the late 20s, early 30s. But yeah, what surprised me was, because when I think of traditional Native American stickball, it's kind of the woven.
Yeah, as we have here on this problem.
Right. But this apparently really was described as like a carved wooden spoon.
Yeah.
To move it around.
That makes almost more like a highlight.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought too.
Well, so when stories talk about Cherokee stickball, it's the Cherokee word for it is little brother to war, because it's so violent. And Thursday we'll talk about Cherokee stickball, particularly women playing it, who really were violent and acted very close. I'm not getting into that, but yeah, do we know if the Catawba game?
It was very competitive.
Yeah.
And I was surprised there were only 4 players on each team, but I can't imagine that it was not a kind of very rough and tumble.
Yeah.
To politely kind of sport. I mean, particularly since the Catawba was considered such great warriors and fighters. That was kind of makes sense.
You have to wonder if there were disputes settled over,
Right.
stickball game.
Right. Or if the Cherokee and the Catawba ever got together.
Yes, instead of fighting, we'll just play.
Right. And then the play through the war.
Yeah. Well, the audience probably.
Right, yeah.
Probably encourage that. Let's see, we talked about the baseball team. You hear a lot about basketball on reservations. In fact, I think there's a movie coming out soon. I think Shaquille O'Neal's involved in it, called Baseball. Has basketball been much of a sport on the reservation?
People played basketball when we were playing basketball in high school, right?
I did play my freshman year of high school, but I mean, I know a lot of youth participate in basketball, and we have out next to our clinic, we have like a basketball pavilion where the youth love to come out and play there, because we've got a lot of tribal housing that surrounds that. But yeah, I mean, I think that's very much a sport that youth engage in.
Yeah.
They still do the 1-on-1 tournament.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that's a good, they just actually, thank you for mentioning that. Our wellness department helps put on like a 3-on-3 basketball tournament, and definitely every fall. This past year they did it as like a nighttime event, and it's very well received, and a lot of youth participate, but even young adults and older too. So.
Well, speaking of the youth and young adults, are there any recent standout athletes we have promising up and coming young folks?
Gosh.
You think of?
Well, I think, and I don't want to mess it up, but I know Melissa Harris, she has a child that was just invited to participate in, I think it was called the Indigenous Bowl. I hope I don't mess that up, but I mean, it's quite an honor, and I was reading about it last night, but it was for football.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Is there a tendency towards football given your grandfather's success, you think?
Honestly, I don't know. I think that there's standouts in many different sports. I think even track and cross country as well. So I think there are a lot of football standouts, but I believe it's kind of spread across different
Different.
sports.
Did you get one?
Yes.
Okay, so I thought so, and I even thought, I'm going to ask this question, but I want to make sure.
My oldest daughter went to Carolina,
And then, well, we appreciate it. This Carolina or the
the other,
other?
USC, Columbia.
Oh, this,
Yeah,
this
it's-
Carolina.
it's-
Okay.
That's
That's where I'm from, see,
Here. Oh, gotcha, gotcha.
Yeah, promote that. But when you were there, was the legacy of your father, your grandfather, did it ever come up? Did folks know who you were? Was there any mention or recognition there when you were a student?
For me, yeah, I remember going downtown one time in a place that I wouldn't normally have gone down, and someone came up to my table and said, "Aren't you Buck George's daughter?" And I thought, "Oh my God." So, yeah, they had special seats for him at Clemson at the football games. Yeah, he was pretty well known for his football.
Was that still there when Chris and Judy got her last name?
Yeah, I would say when I would have discussions with somebody, if like we were out, tailgating at a football game, or if we went to a football game and we're talking with individuals, people definitely know if you drop the name. But it's not like just walking around, somebody's gonna be like, oh, you're related. But most definitely if I say, Buck George, it's 9 times out of 10, the person's gonna say, oh yeah, I remember him, blah, blah. So, yeah.
So Crystal, in your work, I assume you promote exercise as part of a healthy lifestyle. And in addition to the youth, just in general, are there particular sports that are encouraged today by the health services, or certain things? And you mentioned the running programs. Are there other things that you're promoting? Are folks playing pickleball on the
No, I don't think like that, for example, but we definitely promote the youth running program. We also, of course, like I mentioned, there's events that are activity focused. So we have the 3-on-3 basketball tournament that was mentioned earlier. Each year in the spring, we put on the Catawba Nation River Run, which is it's a trail race along the Catawba River. It's beautiful. It's the hardest race I've run. And I always joke with the coordinator for that event, because it's of all the races I've run, that probably is the hardest one I've run, but it's also one of the most beautiful, just being able to run along the river and on our own trails, but other than that, we're there. I can't think of a specific program. That would be great to develop some other programs geared towards activities, but other than that, it's just events like, a one-time only kind of event, not a 8-week, program that goes on. So
They also have the River Ramble, which is kayak,
Yeah.
and canoes.
Well, and then the other, we haven't mentioned, of course, the drumming and dancing in particular. We don't think of dancing necessarily as a sport, but it is quite athletic. Probably from what I've seen, probably the hardest, most physically taxing would be the hoop dancing, right? And we noticed last year you have some new hoop dancers. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the young people have come on strong in learning a lot of the dances, like the hoop dance, and a lot of they're actually been going and competing in powwows.
Yeah.
In both states, and up into Virginia. So that is a big interest for the young people. The Cassie Clollers teaching a lot of the traditional Catawba dances. And so we're trying to make sure that the up and coming youth and adults understand the difference between Catawba traditional and the powwow.
The panning and
Right.
powwow dance. Yeah. And are they doing this in full regalia?
Yes.
Yeah, these powwows very often are held in the hottest times of the year around here. And they're often wearing buckskin and beaded materials and bustles and headpieces
Yeah.
and dancing, very, very vigorous dancing. And I don't know. It just seems.
They're young.
Yeah, that's it. There's a shelf life on that kind of dancing. Oh, let's sort of wrap this part up so we can get toward any questions that we might have, but more of a philosophical question, I guess, that oftentimes sports figures from minority communities can be burdened with or perhaps having to take on the role of being an ambassador for their culture, and they become political, or they get involved in social issues, they become representative of their people. I'm thinking of Muhammad Ali and Tiger Woods, and of course Jim Thorpe, who we've talked about. Do you see Catawba athletes choosing this role, or perhaps having it thrust upon them? And what are your thoughts in general about sports and shaping society and attitudes toward, in this particular case, the Catawba? Until I write essay questions.
Yes. Well, I only looking back at Dad, I think his biggest impact was not so much a particular stance, but the way he lived his life, and the way he'd always say to myself and my sister and his grandkids is that you are ambassadors for your tribe. Remember that wherever you are, because you are representing them. And I think that's very, that was just his stance. He was the quiet way of promoting. He wasn't an activist or anything of that nature, but he would let you know in a heartbeat that he loved his people, and he loved sports, and that it's sort of like a community that no longer has art and cultural programs. There's a big gap in the growth levels, and I think a lot of stats prove crime level and everything. Well, sports has a place too. It certainly helps form character in those that are playing sports.
Crystal, did you feel that you were representing? Did you get the same message from your grandfather and from the parents?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was something that, growing up, he kind of laid the example. And I think it opens the door for conversation. I think it allows for increased confidence too in your culture and in representing it, and there's pride too for your culture and where you come from and whatnot. So I definitely am thankful to my grandfather specifically for setting that example for both my sister and myself.
What are your thoughts about the Washington mascot? I know your mother.
I don't know. Yeah. I think there's much to be said about it. But they've changed their name. Yeah. So to the Commanders. So I think for the purposes of doing that, I think it's definitely eliminated that conversation now. Just put that there.
Well, and then so Ensley, you did mention the Chief Yellowbird stated that at least he was out there representing you. For the others that you heard about it, you get the same sense that this is.
Well, I think in America particularly, but we like to kind of idealize sports as this non-political, kind of pure. But I mean, it always has been. Okay. You look at Jim Thorpe, you look at Jackie Robinson, Chief Yellowbird. It's almost always in sports where you see some of the very first breakings of the social and racial barriers. And I think that has been as true for Native Americans as African Americans. So, and it is, in a way, it is kind of an idealized space, because sooner or later, where you come from, who you are, the color of your skin doesn't matter as much as how good you are at the sport, as your sheer talent and ability. And so it very often historically has been a place where talent and ability has overcome political, social, and racial barriers. And I think it's one of the neatest things about sports is its stories.
Yeah.